Sure.
Hi there, I'm Melissa McKay. I'm a developer advocate with JFrog, and I'm here with Mohammed Aboullaite.
Yes. Hello, everyone. Super happy to be here with you
Yes.
at Speakeasy at JFrog.
And like myself, this is your first time at
Exactly, as
this
pretty much
conference.
everyone else.
Yeah.
Inaugural edition of FullConf. So far, so good. I'm impressed with the Finnish community. Looks amazing.
Is this your first time in Helsinki?
Yes. This is,
Same.
Yeah,
Same.
first time. It's beautiful. We came in the winter, unfortunately. I suppose it's much awesome and warmer during the summer.
Yeah.
But
a little
yeah.
bit colder.
Yeah.
I hail from Denver, and I was surprised that when I arrived here, it was warmer.
I saw the tweet actually. We, because I live in Stockholm, we had a pretty warm winter, I would say. Because like the colder it got was around -7, which is not bad compared to the previous years.
Right.
So yeah, -1 between that during the winter, it's not that bad for a Scandinavian winter.
Pretty nice.
Yeah.
Well, we're enjoying the weather. We're enjoying this venue. Very, very nice place to be in
Yeah.
the conference. You
Have you
don't
checked
even
the
have to
boxing
go
room?
outside. Yes, saw the boxing
Yeah,
room.
you should show that as well. It's very
It's
cool room to give a talk at. It's like pretty cool.
Well, you're here giving a talk. Do you want
Yes.
to tell us a little bit about it?
Yes, my talk gonna be from Docker fail to Docker file, which is the pun intended. It's basically the learning from all the mistakes that me and my co-speaker made throughout the journey of building containers and cloud native applications, deploying containers into production, and how take those learnings and apply them into and share those knowledge with the attendees to help them avoid the mistakes and pitfalls that we make along the way. Things like how to improve your Docker images, how to add health checks to avoid having your container going down, how to keep security in mind, how to tag, how you can roll backward and forward better. So a lot of best practices that's what I want to share in this talk.
Yeah, really excited to hear about what you're going to say. I am a Docker captain, and I really
Fantastic.
Yeah, I really enjoy watching talks about Docker. I learn something new every time.
Definitely.
There's a lot to know, and especially if you're first starting out, it can be pretty overwhelming.
Exactly.
What would you say is your favorite do not do in Docker?
My favorite do not do in Docker? That's a pretty good question. I would say avoid having multiple Docker files. That's pretty messy to maintain, especially if you have multiple teams or multiple developers in the same team. It gets pretty messy pretty quickly. So favor using multi-stage builds and having targets rather, so we can, or stages they call them, so we can define your target stage. And if you need a dev environment, like if you dev target, you can specify that and build a dedicated environment. So you can maintain everything in the same file, so it does not get pretty messy as much as having like Dockerfile dev or Dockerfile prod. I saw those things. So avoiding that and having like one single file, using multi-stage builds in Docker that is supported, and it enables you to build those specified Docker containers per target, which is much more maintainable, much more focused. So yeah, and this is one of the things that we're going to talk about in the talk as well. So
cool. Yeah, back when I first started working on Docker files, there weren't multi-stage builds.
Yeah.
So my favorite was having very, very large images to work with all the time.
Yeah, we have all been there. I've been there, yeah.
Lots you can do to avoid that, for sure.
Yeah, definitely.
But a lot was trial and error in the beginning. Well, is there anything else that you're going to talk about besides Docker?
No, it's pretty much Docker, and mentioning at the end that you probably don't need a Docker file to build containers. Just a hint.
Okay.
The cloud native ecosystem is pretty huge, and 10 years back when Docker started, this was the only way to build containers until you are a hardcore and you want to play with Linux containers. But Docker, when it came, it basically democratized it, to make it pretty much easier to developers to work with. Now, 10 years later, the ecosystem is pretty huge. There are a lot of things that we can use. If you're in the Java world, there is Jib, a very cool plugin that It's a Maven plugin or Gradle plugin that works and enable you to generate containers without the need of a Docker file or Docker installed. There is build packs. There are other tools and open source tools in the cloud native community that makes building containers a lot more easier without having to maintain the Docker file, without having to worry about best practices, security. Those tools try to do the heavy lifting, implement those best practices, and give you your container image that implements a lot of those best practices out of the hood. So my advice would be know the tools, know your language, the ecosystem, and do a little bit of digging until you find the tools that work with. Having Dockerfile is good, and if you want to maintain them, is fine. But there are some alternatives that are worth exploring as well, and could save you a lot of time of maintaining those Docker files or implementing best practices.
Makes sense. You talked about maintaining Docker files.
Yeah.
This is something I'm interested in as well. As a developer, it felt like a bit of a reach for me in the beginning. Felt like a little bit outside of my wheelhouse.
Exactly.
And surprisingly, every now and then, maybe operations would change it.
Yeah.
Or, do something different, use a different base image perhaps. We might be provided with a different base image. Can you talk a little bit about the complication there? What kind of problems does that cause?
The obvious one is maintainability, especially after our multiple teams or multiple developers working on the same thing. Everyone wants to add a little bit of package for debugging purposes, for speed purposes, and that gets pretty much messy easier. Another thing is how we can ensure that the things that we put in Dockerfile are secure. Because we have problem with the dependencies and maintaining them. Now we added another layer of abstraction, which is containers, how to make sure that whatever we add is actually secure. So it needs to go through a lot of scanning. There's also the concepts of layers and caching in Docker. Everything in Docker is layers basically, and you build layer on top of another layer. So understanding those concepts takes some time, and how to build a Docker file with a Docker image that leverage those concepts to speed up the build process and also to speed up the size of your image, which is really important, and that's something we don't really care about much, especially if you have a speedy internet. But if you are in somewhere with a slow internet, you will feel it. Like having 1 gigabyte and deploying it in the cloud, that would be pretty easy. But having it on your container where you need to pull it or push it, it's going to take a lot of time. And also from an environment point of view, like the smaller your container is, the more environment friendly they are, they consume little resources. So there are a lot of things that make maintaining those Dockerfile an additional overhead for the developers to care about and worry about. So that's why I mentioned earlier, probably there are some tools that will do the heavy lifting for you, and you don't need to worry about those things because they implement those things under the hood. If you have to maintain a Dockerfile, the ecosystem now has grown a lot much in maturity, and there are many linters. We're going to mention the talk Hedolint, which is basically a linter that scan your Dockerfile and give you a lot of hints and a lot of recommendations how to optimize your Dockerfile. So if you have to live with a Dockerfile and you don't want to have the headache of maintaining this Dockerfile, or you're going to go through that headache, use some linters to help you gain that knowledge and build a very good Dockerfile that implements the best practices of maintaining the Dockerfile.
That is an excellent piece of advice. I was just recently introduced to some of these linters myself. I didn't realize they were out there, so it's pretty incredible. Things have improved dramatically for sure since I started using Docker files and writing Docker files. One thing I notice now more than I did back then, of course, was when you're first learning, you go online and you'll find examples of Docker files. But we have to remember that these examples are the simplest thing that works. We had a really good keynote this morning from Tom Cools.
That was very awesome.
Very good.
Yeah.
He basically taught us how to learn. And you start with the smallest things and you build from there.
Exactly.
So do you think it's correct to say that a lot of these examples that you might find online are just the beginning? You really need to dive a little bit deeper into each of the commands that are being used, understand how these are being built before you throw that into production.
Definitely. Some of those answers are pretty much answered at the beginning of Docker a couple of years back, and the system is going really fast that quickly those recommendations become obsolete and new recommendation came in. And the funny part is in the same talk we are following the same path. We're going to basically go to the internet, look for a Stack Overflow image, and then go throughout the talk on how to improve it, because not everything that you find in Stack Overflow or Google is the right thing for you. You need to look for it, assess, like from a security point of view and also from debuggability point of view. Is it debuggable? It implements best practices, and there are tools, as I mentioned, that can help you on that journey. But whatever you find on the internet is good for a starting point, but you need to build around that and make it more production ready. It's the thing that you probably should avoid is taking whatever you find on Stack Overflow and put it directly into production. That's the mistake to avoid.
We can't repeat that enough because it happens every time a new person comes along, because you really don't know any better unless someone tells you this.
Exactly.
You don't know any better. So if you've done this, I certainly have in the past, don't beat yourself up too much for it, but learn from it.
Exactly.
Come to talks like Mohammed's to learn more about how to build these containers responsibly.
Yeah. Come to conferences
make your images
like
better.
Yeah, definitely. And you have in JFrog a lot of tools that help making with containers a lot more easier. Security, you have security scanners that can detect vulnerabilities in a container. So using some of those tools will definitely help you to at least ship securely your container into production.
Yeah. One thing that we do offer is a plugin for Docker Desktop that does some scanning for you.
Yeah.
And it's scans the image. Think about if you have vulnerabilities just in your code base, that's just your code base.
Yeah.
Now we're moving that into a container which has a bunch of other stuff involved. So you've got to consider, in the past we might have worried about packages that were installed on a host, for the OS, like OS packages.
Yeah.
Now these are in containers, and we need to become more responsible as developers to watch these things, make sure they're updated.
Exactly.
Right?
Yeah.
This is something that is a big problem.
We normally forget about updating. I was in the vulnerability of Log4j when it happened, and the Nexus people, Sonatype, they shared a status that basically scared me. After the vulnerability was revealed, more than 50% are still downloading the old vulnerable version.
Oh, wow.
And having something like the JFrog scanning tool that keeps reminding you that you need to update, and block going that version into production is definitely going to help you to avoid shooting yourself in the foot. So having those tools that scan and give you a recommendation and possibly even stop from deploying them will help and make your production deployment a lot more secure.
Yes, we're all human. We need these things to help us, and unfortunately, sometimes we need to feel a little bit of pain.
Yeah.
Meaning we can't get our build out because we haven't updated our stuff.
Exactly.
It's good for us.
Definitely. We can't say that enough. We can't recommend that enough.
All right, well, I am really looking forward to your talk. I'm excited to be here, excited that you're here, excited we get to share this venue, and have a good time at this conference.
Thank you. You too.
Thank you.